Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, From Awareness to Action, How U.S. Consumers and Retailers Are Shaping the Future of Sustainable Seafood, brought to you by Seafood Source and sponsored by the Marine Stewardship Council. We have a few housekeeping notes to go over before we get started. If you need any technical assistance, we first recommend refreshing your browser. If you continue to have technical questions or issues using the On24 platform, make sure you use the Q&A box and I will respond as soon as I can. There will be no call-in number for today's session. To connect, you need to have access to either a computer, tablet, or cell phone audio. Everyone has been automatically muted. If you happen to get disconnected, you can log on again using the instructions provided in your webinar confirmation email. If you continue to have trouble, please email info@seafoodsource.com and I'll respond as soon as I can. For your convenience, everything in the webinar console is fully customizable, so you can move things around, resize the window, and even turn on captions for this event. At the bottom of your console, you will also find a resources box where you can download the slides as well as any additional content for today's presentation. And again, you can ask questions at any time during the presentation by submitting them through the Q&A box. We'll leave some time at the end of our session today to answer as many questions as time allows. And finally, this webinar will be recorded and you'll receive a thank you email with the on-demand materials within 2 business days. And with all of that out of the way, I'd like to welcome our speakers for today. We'll be hearing from Laura McDearis, Senior Market Manager at MSC US. Laura has been with MSC for over 7 years, where she oversees U.S. corporate partnerships and commitments to sustainable seafood. Prior to MSC, she co-founded a seafood CPG startup in California, consulted on the management of the spiny lobster fishery in the Galapagos, worked on board as a fisheries observer for the snow crab fishery in Alaska, and worked in a variety of roles in Alaska tourism. Laura has a master's degree from UCSB in environmental science and management and entrepreneurship. She and her family live in Washington State, where they enjoy spending time in the outdoors. We'll also hear from Kristen Stevens, Senior Marketing Manager at MSC US. Kristen has been at the organization for over 8 years. She leads the U.S. marketing program, working closely with national retailers and brands to inspire consumers to make sustainable seafood choices aligned with their values. Her approach is rooted in data-driven decision-making, leveraging consumer research, and ongoing testing to reach consumers with a message that resonates. Her ultimate goal is to drive meaningful change on the water through empowering consumers with a clear and compelling value proposition for certified sustainable seafood. At this time, I'd like to welcome our speakers and hand the webinar off to Laura.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And great to be here today. Thanks to the Seafood Source team for hosting us. Before we hop in, if you want to make sure that you get invites to future webinars just like this one, there's a link to sign up to our newsletter that our host is about to highlight for you. I'm also going to pop off my video to make sure I come through nice and clear on the audio. But we're so excited to share an update on the U.S. retail market landscape for sustainable seafood. We are specifically going to look at what's changed over the past few years, looking at it from both a pre- and post-pandemic timeframe. And what we're seeing is that we've really hit a tipping point in the marketplace, and we're seeing certifications and sustainability have really become mainstream now in the U.S. We're seeing sustainable products widely distributed across the country and the everyday consumer like you and me becoming more environmentally conscious. Now, don't get me wrong, it's certainly still not everybody, and we have a long ways to go in such a big country, but we are hitting a tipping point where we're starting to see significant changes and shifts. Let's get a quick lay of the land before we dive in. So first, I'm going to walk us through some retail market data on where MSC certified products stand and the changes over the last few years. Next, I'll hand it over to Kristen to discuss our most recent consumer insight survey to understand how U.S. consumers are thinking about sustainability. And last but not least, we'll walk through a few examples of how companies in the U.S. have put these insights into action to get results. And again, feel free to pop questions that you have into the chat, and as we go along the Q&A. All right, so I have the benefit of kicking us off, but I want to give you a heads up that this section on the market data is a little bit meaty. So there's a lot of information. I'm going to really talk just about the key takeaways on each of the slides. So first, I want to point out a few details on our data and reporting periods that we're going to be referring to. A lot of the data that I'm going to be sharing comes from MSC. Companies do report to us directly on the sales and amounts of eco-labeled products sold in each market. For confidentiality reasons, we only report on this on a consolidated basis. We also use the UK fiscal year, which you can see up here on the screen. It runs from April 1st through March 31st. So we're currently nearing the end of our current fiscal year, and purposes of this presentation, I'm mainly going to be referring to our last full year of reporting, which ended in March 2024. Because that's roughly about 10 months ago, we're also going to cover a snapshot of the most recent quarter, Q4 of 2024, so that we get some additional insights on where we are today. Okay, so let's dive in. Sources for the data are denoted at the bottom left for reference. For data from the Marine Stewardship Council, we are referring only to products sold with the MSC Eco label. So broadly across the globe, sales of MSC certified products have been steadily increasing year over year. Specifically in the US, which is what we have here on this slide in the graph, we've seen some major upticks. On the left-hand side in axis and corresponding with the blue bars, you'll see wholesale seafood sales value. It's reaching almost to $1.6 billion in the last full reporting year. Within the last 5 years, that's grown by 61%. And over the last 10 years, it's been an increase in 327%. On the right-hand side in axis, you'll see volumes of products sold in the market, which have reached to about roughly 160,000 metric tons. So over the last 5 years, this has been a growth of 69%. And over the last 10 years, that's been a 255% increase. So again, some big changes. And like I mentioned, this year is still ongoing. So in the dark blue bar, you'll see kind of a conservative forecast of where we might land this year. Okay, so next I'm going to dive into a few different comparisons to talk about how the market has changed on a more granular level. But I want to note a few things about navigation for the slide so it's easier to see what the differences are. So first, we're going to be looking at growth and performance across two different metrics, sales and weight or volume sold. Circled in red is where you can find which metric I'm referring to. In this case, it's sales. It's listed both in the title of the slide and on the axis of the graph on the left-hand side. The second comparison that we're going to be looking at is year-over-year growth or year ago. And then also a comparison over a 5-year time frame or pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. That's denoted in the dark blue circles. It's both in the title, and then you can see on the right-hand side the specific years being called out in the legend. In most cases, I've included 2 graphs on each slide as well to tease out some of the trends. So just take note to look at the scales are different between the graphs, with the left-hand one being always having the biggest scale. The boxes as well, the colorful boxes, indicate percent change, with green denoting an increase and red and pink denoting a decrease. Okay, so first up is a look at performance by sales of species with the MSC label in the US market. Looking at growth over the last 2 years of reporting, one thing to highlight here is that when we start to look more granularly, we start to see some of the details and ups and downs within the industry and a little bit more variability. So those of us that work in the industry know that managing resources like wild fish, and wild fish populations comes with variability year to year, and sometimes things are out of our control. That being said, we're still seeing some big increases in sales across some of the key U.S. staple species, things like your salmon and your tuna. We also see some positive trends in species like crab and swordfish. There are some declines as well, particularly in some of the whitefish species like pollock, cod, sole, and halibut. However, when you compare back to 5 years ago or pre-pandemic, we really start to see how far we've come. So given the nature of our industry, we're always going to see some of that variability year to year. But I think this paints a really good picture of how much more seafood and products are on the market with the MSC label and labeled as certified sustainable. It also speaks to the level of commitments that companies and brands across the US have made to incorporating sustainability into their products and their organization and really moving to signal this with consumers. In many cases here, we're seeing triple-digit increases on the sales of certified products. And while looking at the year prior, there were declines in a few species. That's not the case when you look over the longer term. We've made some significant strides in our market, and again, noting a major shift in terms of the sustainable seafood products becoming more mainstream. And I do want to emphasize how big of a deal this really is. You know, MSC is a partner to fisheries and companies selling sustainable seafood, and we don't do it ourselves. And so when I was putting together the data for this webinar, I was just amazed to see this substantial shift in our market from companies really leaning into sustainability more so now than ever before. And it's not being driven by one company in particular. We're seeing this more as a broad trend across the industry. And yes, it's still not everyone, but again, we're starting to see things turning, and the tides are turning, as we like to say, and we're seeing a big shift in the market. Okay. Now, the question we often get is whether total sales is a result of something like inflation or increased prices. So we also want to look at trends on different metrics like volume or weight sold. So looking at the last 2 reporting periods, annual growth, we see some interesting differences. Tuna moves up to number 1, and salmon, which was at number 1 for sales, drops down to number 3 in terms of amount sold. We also see a few less declines in percentage growth, for example, on sole, which shows a positive growth for volumes, but declines on sales. We also see some higher percentages in volume growth over dollar growth, indicating that the market is likely trying to accommodate for increasing price sensitivities over the last few years. Now, when we look at this over 5 years, we're again seeing how far we've come. Triple or even quadruple digit increases for some of the major species like tuna, pollock, and salmon. You also see some keyed growth in domestic products like cod and sole. They're not exclusively domestic. And big increases in volumes of sea bass or toothfish, which has largely been driven by some of the major retailers. We also see the new addition of squid, and while it didn't rank in the top 15 for value, we see it pop up here on volumes. And just to note, the first squid fishery became MSC certified. It was a domestic fishery off the East Coast, and that happened in 2018. Since then, we've had California come on board, and so we're seeing more volume with products with the MSC label. There's a couple declines worth noting just since they're on here. We had seen some declines in clams and scallops. Scallops possibly due to some of the declines in catch over the last couple of years. Okay, so now I want to shift over from our species view to taking a look at retail at the category level. So what areas of the retail stores are we seeing the most success in? So we're going to look at the same comparisons that in the same way that we did for species, looking at both metrics of sales value and volumes or weight sold, and then comparing those over the 2 time scales, annual growth and over the last 5 years or pre-pandemic. So first up, we're looking at annual growth in wholesale sales value over the last 2 reporting periods. We see kind of a mixture of increases and decreases across the categories, which evens out when we assume kind of like a modest growth increase across the US as a market overall. We see the biggest jump in the canned seafood category at 20%, a slight increase in frozen at 4%, and there's some modest decline in fish counter sales, but an uptick in the chilled prepackaged products. MSC does also work with partners in the omega-3 supplements and pet products categories across retail. So you'll see those on these slides. Now, comparing the same values over a 5-year time period, we again see the trends are positive, and we're highlighting again how far we've come since pre-pandemic times. We've seen astounding growth across all categories, almost entirely in the triple digits. We've seen really big jumps in frozen and canned categories, and most of us have probably seen this played out at retail. You can walk into almost any grocery retailer in the US and find at least one MSC certified item on the shelves, often in the frozen and canned categories, but not exclusively. While we do see some changes in the other categories closer to the right-hand side, I wanted to point out a few staples in our industry. MSC certified surimi has a long-standing market presence in the US, particularly with Alaska pollock being one of the primary sources. We have seen an uptick in sales of those products, even though it might look smaller in comparison. Supplements are another interesting one. The US has been the main market for MSC certified fish and krill oils, with those products being around for more than 10 years. But that category has had some challenges, which mirrors what we've heard from our partners. Okay, now we switch back over to weight or volume sold to see how these trends change. Again, we're looking at whether increases in value are a result of increases in pricing or truly if there's more products on the market. So first up is comparing the last 2 reporting years for annual growth. We see a few shifts in the order of the categories here. Canned and frozen have swapped places, with canned now having the highest volume sold. Surimi and pet move up significantly over fresh seafood categories, and supplements are now last, unsurprisingly, because their product weight is pretty low in comparison. The canned category is showing 17.8% growth in volume sold, mixed with a 20.3% growth in sales, might indicate that at least some of these products are able to capture a price premium. Frozen is showing the opposite trend with higher growth in volumes over value. We do want to note as well that individual unit pricing is not necessarily the only thing at play here. We do have companies that are changing packaging, product sizing, and developing things like more value-added products, which play into this. Now, looking at this over a 5-year time period, by and large, we see the same trend with big increases across the board. Again, we're painting the picture here that while there is variability on a yearly timescale, the differences that we're seeing pre and post-pandemic are huge. The biggest growth in retail has been in the canned and frozen categories, but we're still seeing growth across the board. So I also want to note here that within the last 5 years, we really see the emergence of pet in this time period. This is a new and growing category for MSC with our partnerships as we start to see pet parents and pet brands becoming more sustainably minded and coming online very quickly with that. Okay, so we've highlighted the fact that MSC certified products are being sold more in the US over the last 5 years. But we also want to take a look at the total market for seafood at retail and see, is the percentage of MSC labeled items actually changing? Is there a growing percentage, both pre and post pandemic? So I want to specifically mention here that the Food Marketing Institute, or FMI, graciously allowed us to cite their Power of Seafood report from last year, 2024, in which they partner with Circana. So these comparisons are possible because of their work, so thank you to FMI. FMI's report breaks down retail seafood categories into the 4 sections on the left-hand side. You have frozen, fresh, grocery, and deli. Left to right across the top, we start with dollar sales from 2023 for all seafood per category. Next is the percent change from the prior year. Next over, we have dollar sales of MSC labeled products. And next over from that, we have the percent change of MSC labeled sales from a year ago. So the main part I want to highlight is the right-handmost 2 columns, the percent of the market that is MSC certified and how that's changed from the year before. We see that roughly 11% of the frozen seafood category is MSC certified, up about a percentage point from the year prior. Fresh is at almost 4%, down slightly. Grocery is at a whopping 20%, up 3 points from the year prior. And deli is down slightly at 4%, down year over year. Now, taking a step back to look at this on a longer time frame over the last 4 years, which is still both pre and post pandemic, we're again seeing a lot of the positive trends across the board. Mirrored in the other slides that I showed, we're seeing significant growth in the percentage of MSC labeled products, really in the frozen and grocery aisles. Modest growth in fresh and a little bit of decline in the deli. If you take a look at the blue box circled at the bottom for total seafood categories, you'll see we're at about 8.7% of seafood products in US retail being MSC labeled, up about 2.8%. And while that might seem small, we have to remember that's for all seafood, not just wild caught. And so we've come a long way. And this, again, does not include products like pet or supplements. So an interesting nugget that we didn't want to leave out that we've noticed is the increase in the amount of MSC label use in retail private label. We've seen over 460% growth in this area over the last 10 years in terms of number of SKUs on the market. On the left-hand side, you can see a list of a bunch of US retailers that currently have private label that's MSC certified. You'll see some major ones on there like Walmart's and Whole Foods and Lidl's and Aldi's, but also some smaller ones. The huge growth in MSC labeled products available on shelves, which has been often driven by consumer demand, sometimes by risk mitigation as well. But it demonstrates the hard work that retailers and suppliers are making in terms of making sure that sustainable options are more accessible. And that's a really important part to lowering barriers for consumer action to support them in shopping their values. Okay, so I'm going to pause and take a quick sip of water because that section was a little bit meaty. And that was a lot of data all at once. And so again, just to reiterate, the information that I just shared is the quote unquote historical data with the most recent reporting period ending March of 2024. And so now we want to shift over to look at some of the more recent insights into how seafood products and MSC labeled products are performing. So MSC has been working with SPINS, another retail data provider, who helped us with the following few updates. But also noteworthy to mention that if any brands or companies do work with SPINS, you can look at your products and categories based on MSC certified label use. Okay, so I'm going to dive into a couple more comparisons, but want to orient everybody in terms of the structure of the slides. So we're going to look at performance of MSC labeled products versus the broader seafood category. So that is both on the left-hand side and the right-hand side specifically. There's two different metrics for each listing and tracking performance. Those are located in the blue boxes. So we have dollars sold compared to the prior period, as well as the percent change, that's on top, and the number of units sold compared to the prior period, and the percent change, that's the blue boxes on the bottom. We're also going to look at this performance in different types of retailers. So that's denoted in the red circle at the bottom center. And then we're also going to look across two different time frames. So the last 4 weeks and the last 12 weeks. And that is specifically denoted in the dark blue circle in the title at the top. If anybody is confused, the details are also in the citation bottom left. Okay, so diving in, and what do the results show? So here we are looking at the last 4 weeks ending December 1st, 2024. And we're looking at both conventional and natural retailers combined, which is again denoted at the bottom blue box. What we're seeing here is that on the right-hand side, total seafood categories, total sales and units sold for all seafood categories have declined during that time period. We have dollar sales down over a percentage point and unit sales down by over 7%. This might not be terribly surprising to many people on this call. Seafood Source just came out with another article recently about this trend also continuing through December. However, when you look at the left-hand side, we see that MSC labeled items have been performing well over the same time period. So dollar sales are up by almost 4%, but it's not just dollars. Unit sales are also up. And this is pretty significant when you compare the two. Okay, so now we switch to looking at the same comparison, but this time only for natural retail stores, as denoted, again, blue box on the bottom center. So think of your Sprouts, your Bristol Farms, or your regional store selling natural items. Looking on the right-hand side, again, seafood sales are still down in these stores, although much less so. When you look over at the left-hand side, at MSC labeled products, we see a bigger change in the dollar sales at 4% up. Additionally, the units sold in these retailers have seen an increase of almost 15% over the last 4 weeks. This might not surprise a lot of us on the call because natural food shoppers do tend to be environmentally conscious. However, it's still important to note that consumers might be purchasing less seafood in the last 4 weeks, but when they do, they are choosing certified sustainable options by and large. Now, we go back to the comparison for all major retailers, both conventional and natural, this time over a 12-week period. So we want to look at whether the trends I just showed are kind of a blip in time or whether this is something that's really potentially playing out broader across the marketplace. So again, we see the same trends continue over a 12-week period in the fall. On the right-hand side, we show retail seafood category sales declining overall. It's down roughly 5% in sales and 6% in units sold. In comparison, on the left-hand side, we see how MSC certified items have been performing, again demonstrating increases in sales and units sold at over 2% and 3% respectively. And what I really want to call out here is the fact that we're seeing sustainability hitting a turning point to go mainstream. And while it might not surprise a lot of us that natural food shoppers are selecting certified sustainable products, we are seeing this trend now mirrored in conventional retail. Consumers are starting to vote with their wallets and choose certified sustainable products over other options. And last but not least, the trends do continue when you look at the natural channel over the last 12 weeks. It mirrors the same as we would expect, but again, is a little bit more pronounced with certified items performing better. Now, we are going to be keeping our eyes on the data to see how this continues to play out in the market. There's obviously variability between the seasons and with availability of products, but our best get is that these trends are here to stay. Okay, so now that we've seen how things are playing out in retail, both in the short term and how things have changed over the last 5 years, I want to switch over to Kristen so we can understand a little bit more from the consumer side. So Kristen's going to share a little bit about our most recent consumer survey and what is top of mind for consumers these days.
Great, thanks, Laura. All right, let's dive in. So before diving into this consumer research, I just wanted to give you all a quick overview of where and how we're getting these insights. Kind of like Laura did, just a lay of the land. So MSC commissions a GlobeScan, which is an independent research and strategy consultancy, to run one of the largest surveys of seafood consumers every 2 years. That's over 20,000 seafood consumers surveyed in 23 markets around the globe. So really substantial survey size here. And today we'll specifically dive into the US market, just so we can compare and contrast some of what Laura shared. And we'll talk about the latest research that was in field in Q1 of 2024. I'll also be sneaking in some video insights from our work with Watch Me Think, which I feel like really helps bring some of the survey data to life as well. All right. Support for seafood sustainability is at an all-time high in the US, with really strong support for only choosing seafood from sustainable sources. And also a sense of empowerment and a belief that people's choice at the grocery store can actually make a positive difference to the health of the ocean. That's really great to see. When we do some comparisons, we see that the US is actually catching up with Europe in terms of environmental consciousness. And the US consumers' concern for environmental health and seafood sustainability has risen significantly since 2020. And this is really evidence that in a growing interest and care in a market with historically lower attitudes. A growing number of seafood consumers are changing their diets for environmental reasons. Like Laura said, this is starting to become a mainstream concern to vote with their wallets and change their habits in order to support the environment. We're now seeing over a third, 36% of seafood consumers say that they've changed their diets for environmental reasons. I'm highlighting here a few of the things they were able to select. So sourced from a sustainable source, they're interested in protecting the environment, reducing the impact on climate, and protecting the oceans. And so that's definitely seen a significant change since some of the couple of years prior when we ran this survey before. You can also see here that diet changes for health have increased quite significantly, even more so than in the immediate post-pandemic years. And the reason I bring this up is because health and sustainability are often linked purchase motivators, and they're both increasing in importance. So next to price, health concerns are really most influential in driving American consumers' purchase decisions. And people are more motivated to eat fish if it's both healthy and sustainable, and they even link these two attributes sometimes. We've seen in some of our other survey questions that people are starting to believe that if it's eco-labeled, if it's environmentally sustainable, it's better for their health, and vice versa. And it can be quite successful. We've seen MSC partners do this to promote these attributes in tandem if you can communicate both credibly. because then you're showing that win-win for consumer, something that's good for them, but also good for the ocean too. So now I'm going to break down the data in a little bit of a different way. We're looking at seafood consumers of various retailers. So what this means is those who regularly purchase seafood at insert retailer, though not exclusively. So someone could be a frequent seafood consumer at Costco, but also a frequent seafood purchaser at Target. And I picked out some of the top national retailers where we have the largest sample sizes to be able to analyze today. So we're looking at the percent of seafood consumers that change their diet for environmental reasons, all those factors listed here in green on the screen. And we're seeing here that not only those that shop at natural grocers are changing their diet to help the environment, but also conventional seafood shoppers or seafood store shoppers are over-indexing. Target, Whole Foods, seafood consumers are significantly over-indexing, as you can see. But Aldi, Costco, Sprouts, they're all much higher than the average US seafood shopper. So shifting gears here to share with you an insight from, or a couple insights from GlobeScan's annual Healthy and Sustainable Living report. I, by the way, highly recommend that you check these out. They're released every year in the summer or fall, and it gives that more high-level 10,000-foot view into the sustainability landscape. It goes beyond seafood, and it's looking at sustainable shopping behaviors in sustainable shopping in general. This can be in beauty, in health and wellness, and across the board, including food. We're looking at the general public in the US and Canada for this slice of data. Again, not just seafood consumers. And consumers were asked, have you bought an environmentally friendly product in the past month? And over 4 in 10 responded yes. Those respondents were then also asked, how did they know that the product was environmentally responsible or sustainable? And they could choose up to 3 among a number of options. I'm just showing a few here on screen. And 30% chose certifications and labels as the way that they could identify an environmentally friendly product. Now, also looked at those who said that they did not choose an environmental product in the last month. 58% of those people, 73% said they would have liked to buy a sustainable product if they could have. So we know that people are really interested in sustainable products, but there are other factors, other barriers that affect their choices and their ability to buy it. Digging into that a little bit further. So when they were asked, well, why were you not able to buy the product that was environmentally responsible, but you would like to? And over half of US and Canadian shoppers said it's because they were too expensive. And then almost 4 in 10 said they didn't know about it. And then lastly, a third said they couldn't find it. So addressing price here. So we see this in our seafood consumer study that over half of seafood consumers report a willingness to pay more for fish from a certified sustainable source. And we do see that MSC certified products are outperforming none. Laura just shared this in some of the SPINS data. But that said, price can still be a barrier, and a price premium for sustainability is never a guarantee. And there's a limit to how much more people are willing to pay for sustainable. The good news, though, is that more brands have committed to offering affordable and sustainable products, including store brand options like Laura shared as well. We've seen huge growth there in private label. And that helps make these products, these sustainable products, more accessible to the average consumer. We're also seeing companies using non-traditional species or products, and that can be more cost effective. And we've seen some really interesting innovation. Alaska pollock is a great example. And then major success stories like US West Coast groundfish fishery with affordable species like rockfish. Now, speaking to the challenges with knowledge and availability, this offers opportunities as well. So retailers can help guide consumers more actively, helping them shop their values. So many already are. I'm going to share a couple of case studies shortly. And then lastly, we do see consumers are expecting more of companies and brands when it comes to environmental commitments. It's important for brands and retailers to have that validation of their sustainability claims. to make them as impactful and credible to the increasingly discerning consumer. So 7 in 10 seafood consumers believe companies should verify their sustainability claims. And people are becoming more discerning across age groups. So when I used to look at this data from a couple surveys back, there was a trend that typically older generations were more concerned with environmentally or third-party verified environmental claims. But now I'm seeing this across age groups, that people are more discerning, more concerned. Most all retailers here over-index or are within average. Albertsons, Safeway, Sprouts, Target, Whole Foods, seafood consumers are definitely over-indexing, though, all between 8 and 11 points. So that's pretty significant. So here I want to share with you one of those Watch Me Think insights. So we see that environmental labels and signposting of sustainability, it really does make a difference to the consumer, and it influences purchases, not just in store, but online as well.
When you see the symbol, it means the term is planet friendly, with an independent certification to verify it's environmentally sustainable. That's awesome. Yeah, that gets my attention immediately.
Yeah, when it says like sustainable fishing practices, I think that that's really, well, it's one of the features on the page that is most helpful in choosing, because it brings it up a level, it brings it up a notch.
Over half of seafood consumers say that eco-labels on packaging raise their trust in the brands that carry them. And most all seafood shoppers of the retailers on screen here either track with or have even higher trust than the average seafood consumer. The only exception here is Publix, though it's still quite high. Albertsons, Safeway, Sprouts, Target, Whole Foods, all significantly over-indexed. We asked seafood consumers what actions have they taken in the last year, and what actions are they willing to take in the future to protect the fish and seafood in our oceans. There were 10 different actions that they were able to choose from. So things like switching to brands or a store with more sustainable product, buying more eco-labeled fish, choosing the seafood with less plastic packaging. I picked out 2 here for us to look at today. All over-index, but there are definitely some standouts. So for reported purchase of sustainable seafood, Albertsons, Target, and Whole Foods seafood shoppers stand out. And then for those that report buying more eco-labeled seafood, Sprouts, Target, and Whole Foods stand out. And now, when looking at all those actions people have taken and are willing to take all together, again, this was 10 actions. There's a lot of willingness to shop sustainably and support the ocean, and there's been significant growth in willingness since 2022, but far fewer reporting action and virtually no change since 2022. So there's definitely a values action gap here, and it's particularly large here in the States. All right. So overall, people really want to support a healthier planet, healthier ocean. They want to balance what's good for them and what's good for the ocean. Also finding things that are within budget. So let's hear from one of those seafood consumers before I dive into a couple case studies.
I just in a practice to try to make sure that I'm making great choices for my body, and of course, like I said, for the environment and the greater humankind. I think that's just the least I could do in making informed purchases that benefit others beyond myself.
All right, so now let's look at some of the ways retailers and brands have helped to close the values action gap for shoppers. So Walmart signposted their sustainable seafood commitments in fresh and frozen, and the environmental certifications then shoppers can look for in their stores and on their products. Stores that promoted this campaign and that invested in the sustainable seafood space and assortment changes, they saw around 25% improvement in fresh seafood sales compared to the rest of the Walmart US stores. Sharing another example here, Sam's Club members gave a choice between certified and non-certified supplements. They ran a side-by-side test in stores across the US. And certified supplements were priced slightly higher, and they did include some simple point of choice messaging in addition to the certification. So pallet skirts, trays, cards, product labels. And the MSC certified products won, with shoppers overwhelmingly voting with their wallet for the certified option. Another example here, so Chicken of the Sea co-promoted a pantry staple, so an approachable, accessible product, a really good entry point into sustainability. And this contributed to significant awareness growth in LA, where this campaign was run. And efforts like this really help convert that future eco-conscious consumer and fill their sustainable food basket. All right, so, and lastly, just a case study, but also an opportunity for you that's coming up. This is now our third year of running a consumer engagement campaign during Earth Month, which is April. We've seen a lot of success in using this month, a time of heightened environmental consciousness and messages around sustainability. There's also increased seafood consumption and interest in seafood. And it's a really great time for us to promote certified sustainable seafood alongside partners. Last year, we had over 22 companies join us in promoting this campaign across digital and offline channels, helping to educate millions and millions of Americans on certified sustainable seafood. So for partners, collaborators on this call, joining our 2025 Earth Month campaign coming up here fast, it's an opportunity to reach new customers, engaging that growing environmentally conscious segment that we've talked about today. But it also gives you access to a number of new marketing resources to help promote your certified sustainable products, assets for online use, offline use, in-store, social media, website, etc. A lot of this content is customizable too to really help you tell your unique sustainability story and really promote your sustainable products with credibility and with impact too. Even if you're not a partner, I still encourage you to scan the QR code and sign up for our email newsletter to access all of these MSC updates, resources, events, like Laura said, webinars like this, sharing consumer research, and opportunities like this campaign, like joining Earth Month. Definitely either sign up here or reach out to Laura and myself directly. All right, it's almost time for Q&A. So just wanted to recap what we've shared today. There's been a significant growth in certified sustainable seafood in the US market and record support among US seafood consumers for environmental sustainability. And it's a market with historically less engagement, but people are more aware of environmental issues like overfishing and climate change than ever before. Sustainability is absolutely a mainstream concern now. And this provides opportunities for businesses to capitalize on that momentum, whether it's promoting and more actively promoting your sustainability commitments, whether it's expanding your eco-label offerings or launching your first certified sustainable product. All right, and with that, hand it back over.
All right, thank you so much, Kristen. So we're now moving into our Q&A portion of today's session. If you have not already asked a question, or if you think of another question, don't forget to pop it into the Q&A box now highlighted on your screen. We do already have some great questions here to get started with. Our first question here, is there a specific action you have seen from companies that consumers seem to be the most receptive to that change their shopping behavior or mindset towards buying certified seafood?
There's not one specific action I'd say. There's not like a silver bullet. I wish there was. But we do know what works well is making it really clear at point of sale that the product is verified to be sustainable, whether that's online point of sale or offline. And just make it really simple for consumers to understand that it's sustainable. This can be signage in store. eco-labeling. It can be information on product pages, especially if we're talking e-commerce. There's so much that consumers are thinking about when they're shopping. So whatever retailers and brands can do to help lessen that mental load is really going to be impactful.
Thank you for that. We have another question here. This user commented, great data. Is there any evidence from companies using MSC that they have increased sales as a result of the certification?
Sure, I can take that. So Kristen highlighted a couple different key insights. The one I would probably point to is the Sam's Club example in terms of that omega-3 supplement product, where Sam's Club did actually see when they put those products side by side, one had the MSC label, the other didn't. It was the same product. The MSC labeled item performed better. We are also seeing, it's kind of a little bit of a mixed bag where becoming MSC certified has often led some of our partners to gaining access to work with certain businesses or certain markets. Historically, that's always been really over in Europe, thinking about 10 years ago, where becoming certified opened up opportunities to get in with key retailers that had sustainability commitments. Again, like we kind of walked through today, we're now seeing those trends mirrored here with substantial sustainability commitments with US retailers and beyond that as well, in terms of committing to certified options more so than they have in the past. And so TBD, I think this is going to be a trend that kind of continues into the future, and hopefully we see our partners having increased sales as a result of becoming certified.
Thank you. Another question here. This one is also for Laura. Could you explain the dramatic increase in both sales and volume of MSC certified lobster and crab over the 5-year period? I believe it was a 1,548% increase in lobster sales in the 5-year period. How is that impacted by MSC certification of U.S. lobster?
Yes, absolutely. So great question. I do want to note just part of the reason for some of those numbers are the reporting period, which again, the last year was ending March 31, 2024. We also sometimes see, obviously, most of us know on this call that U.S. lobster is no longer certified as of today. And hopefully we'll have an opportunity for them to re-engage in the program in the future. A couple things at play here. Maine lobster is not the only source of certified lobster available. There are other species as well that play into that category, including spiny lobster, which we've seen increases in some of the MSC certified sources for, including a certification in the Bahamas somewhat recently in the last 5 years. So that's all lumped together in that category, just to note. But I will also say, I believe some of the inventory issues also play into this as well. So even though Maine lobster may have lost certification within the last couple of years, some of the products might still be selling through retail as well. We also have Canadian lobster as well that's coming into the US.
Thank you. Another question here. What is your take on awareness among processors and distributors, food service and restaurants? And what does MSC do to increase the engagement?
Perfect. Yeah, so food service and distributors, we do have partners that work in that sector. MSC has been most successful in terms of partnerships at retail and with prepackaged products at times. But again, we work very much with food service and food service providers as well. We recognize that they have specific challenges with working with the MSC, particularly when you look at the food service space and the restaurant level and certification. So right now, we're actually undergoing a review of our chain of custody certification, which is the certification for businesses, to see if there's a way that we can make it more accessible and fit for purpose with food service operators to better service that market. That being said, we do have some success stories. We do have some certified food service in the US, some sushi providers like Sushi Maki on the East Coast, Bamboo Sushi on the West Coast. Across the globe, there's a couple good examples. Like in the UK, we have a fish and chips group that joined together for certification and has been really successful. But we are looking for ways to better service some of those markets right now. If anybody has feedback that they would like to provide to the MSC and how we could better do that, we are actually taking input right now. So feel free to reach out to myself.
Another question here. How do you delineate consumer preferences for eco labels, and increase of sales for just raising awareness and branding?
Do you mind reading that one again?
Yeah, sorry. How do you delineate consumer preferences for eco labels and increase of sales for just raising awareness or branding?
Go ahead, Laura, sorry.
Okay, yeah. Kristen, feel free to jump in as well. I'm imagining that that is probably referring to some of the sales data on performance and how do we know if that's actually a result of MSC label application or other factors. And so I don't have the details off of the top of my head. The answer is yes, there might be some other trends that are here at play. But when we look at it at a broader level, there has been, and we actually took out one of the examples we were going to share with non-GMO, for example, where they've been able to demonstrate where a certification over a self-made claim has performed way better in the marketplace. I mean, that's not answering the question in full because it doesn't include branding and things like that, but we have some other data points to back up the fact that consumers are increasingly looking at that third-party verification of environmental practices, or just that businesses are basically saying what they're doing. There's that increased scrutiny that I think a lot of us have seen in the US in terms of labeling. And it's a trend that we kind of see continuing into the future. Kristen, I don't know if you want to comment on anything else.
No, I think that was well said, yeah.
Awesome. Well, we are just about out of time. Before we close out today, I do have a few final housekeeping notes to cover. If you could please fill out the short evaluation form that will appear on the webinar console. This will help us better serve your needs in future webinars. As a reminder, the on-demand materials will be emailed to everyone within 2 business days. This will include a PDF of the slides as well as a link to the recording of today's presentation. And again, everyone will receive this email within 2 business days. Thank you again to Laura and Kristen for a great presentation today, and thank you to our attendees for taking the time out of your busy days to join us. This webinar was brought to you by Seafood Source and sponsored by Marine Stewardship Council. Thank you all and have a great day.
Bye. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks so much.